Chapter 1. Looking at his watch, then up at the grand mid-19th century facade of the Gare du Nord Paris Metro, Danny Pearson continued to look for his target while polishing off the rest of his Whopper burger. He glanced at the man's picture on his phone, then sat back under Burger King's outside canopy and resumed his watchful eye. 5 minutes later, his target, Miles Marshbrook, emerged from the train station. The tall, skinny, nervous man with the leather overnight bag slung across his shoulder looked both ways before scurrying across the road. He walked past Danny and disappeared out of sight, heading off down the Boulevard de Strasbourg. Danny drained the rest of his drink through the straw. He was in no hurry to follow. He knew where Marshbrook was heading. What did interest him were the two Middle Eastern men who exited the train station a minute later. They took a quick glance either way before crossing the road, their eyes locking back onto Marshbrook as they followed him down the Boulevard de Strasbourg. Danny slid the food wrappers into the bin and strolled out of the canopied shade into the hot summer sun. With the boulevard full of Parisians and tourists, Danny knew Marshbrook would be relatively safe until he checked into his reservation at the Hotel Relais de Louvre, opposite the famous Louvre Art Museum, next to the River Seine. His brief from Howard was simple. Meet Miles Marshbrook in room 18 of the hotel, exchange money for the information Mr. Marshbrook claimed to have regarding the identity of an inside man who had been selling military defence weapons designs to the Middle East. Not wanting to turn up late to the party, and due to the location of the meet, Danny had taken an educated guess that Marshbrook would take the train into the city. Following at the rear of the procession, Danny studied the look and movement of the two Middle Eastern men ahead of him. They were wearing zipped-up jackets, even though it was swelteringly hot, suggesting concealed weapons. And they walked with purpose, upright, regimented military trained with rock-steady focused heads on solid necks. Danny's best guess was Saudi Secret Services. They crossed onto Boulevard de Sebastopol and then continued towards the river, the two men ahead peeling off and entering a shop while Marshbrook walked into Starbucks to get a coffee. Danny continued to walk along the tree-lined boulevard, passing all three of them to cross the road and turned down towards the Pont de Change bridge. Picking up his pace, he followed the river towards the Louvre. Within 5 minutes, Danny was sitting on a bench across from a grand Gothic church and in sight of the entrance to the Hotel Relais de Louvre. It didn't take long for Marshbrook to approach the hotel from the more direct route. He looked around nervously before entering, obvious to the trained eye that he didn't know what he was supposed to be looking for. The two Middle Eastern men entered the hotel a minute later, still visible to Danny through the front window as they pretended to look at the tourist board inside the foyer while Marshbrook checked in. Moving closer, Danny tucked in behind an Enterprise rental van parked opposite the hotel. Peeping around the back of it, he could see Marshbrook taking the room keys from the receptionist and heading away to the stairs at the rear of the hotel. Once Marshbrook was out of sight, the pretty dark-haired receptionist turned her attention to the two Middle Eastern men, a smile on her face as she asked them if she could help. To Danny's surprise, one of the men pulled a silenced handgun from his jacket and shot the young woman in the forehead. The shocked look locked on her face as she toppled off the back of the reception chair. Without delay, the other man moved around the back of the reception desk and pushed the woman out of sight in the space under it. Danny crossed the road, his eyes locked on the two men as they headed out of sight up the stairs. Shit, that went sour quickly. Moving inside, Danny pulled his own silenced Glock from his jacket and headed to the stairs. The stairwell was old and small in the centuries-old building, giving no view from the centre from the bottom to the top. Taking the steps as fast as he could go without making a sound, Danny moved up each floor, stopping to listen on the landing and then continuing up when he couldn't hear anyone. When he finally reached the top floor, he darted his head into the landing, taking a quick mental snapshot of the empty corridor before entering and heading towards room 18. Standing to one side, Danny moved his ear close to the gap and listened. He could hear voices, too faint to tell what they were saying, but he guessed they would be facing away from the door as they questioned Marshbrook. With his gun raised, Danny took a few deep breaths, tensing and relaxing his leg muscles, priming them for fast movement as he played out a surprise shock and awe attack in his mind. 1, 2, 3. Danny burst through the door with astounding speed, his gun up and ready to shoot both men as they turned. His plans were scuppered when he saw them facing him with their guns pointed in his direction. On his second step into the room, Danny planted his right leg on the wall beside him and kicked himself sideways through the ensuite door as a bullet whizzed past his ear, punching a neat hole through the hotel door behind him. "Stop, we need him alive!" shouted one of the men to the other. In the ensuite, Danny flipped himself into the large cast-iron bath. Firing over the lip, he punched a neat line of holes in the direction of the Middle Eastern men through the tile, wood and plaster wall that separated the ensuite from the bedroom. He heard grunts of pain as he found his target, followed by a stream of bullets erupting back his way, showering him in bits of plaster and tile before striking the side of the heavy cast-iron bathtub with a deafening clang. When the gunfire ceased, Danny could just about hear heavy breathing and grunts of pain above the ringing in his ears. Poking his head above the tub, he closed one eye and looked through a bullet hole into the bedroom. He could see one man lying down on the bed and the legs of someone on the floor. Climbing out of the tub, Danny spun out of the ensuite into the bedroom, his gun trained on the man sitting on the floor, his back propped up against the outside wall. He looked at Danny with defeated eyes, blood oozing from his chest. The gun was still in his hand, but he no longer had the strength to lift it. Danny turned to Marshbrook sitting in the corner, a crimson flood covering his white shirt from his freshly opened up neck. Flipping open Marshbrook's overnight bag, Danny found a manila folder. He opened it up to find the details of the hotel booking and details of a job interview for an IT company in Paris. The name on the booking and interview was Jean-Paul Marsalas. There was no information, no exchange. He'd been set up. Danny folded the papers up and put them in his pocket before rifling through the pockets of the dead man on the bed. He went through the wallet. No ID, no cards, just some cash. Crouching down in front of the man sitting against the wall, Danny slapped him lightly on the cheek. "Who do you work for?" he said. The man looked at him with semi-conscious eyes. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. Without expression, Danny reached over, grabbed a pillow off the bed, and shoved it on the man's face. He pushed the silencer of his gun into the middle of the pillow and pulled the trigger with a dull metallic ping. The man's body jerked before slumping back down. Throwing the pillow to one side, Danny removed the man's phone and some vehicle keys. He placed the man's thumb on the phone to unlock it and frowned when his own picture looked back at him. Pocketing the phone, Danny picked up the vehicle keys and stood. He noticed the Enterprise keyring on the keys and walked to the window. With a press of the button, Danny watched the hazard lights of the van below flash as it unlocked. Feeling the need to get out, Danny took a neatly folded towel off the chair and went into the bathroom. He wiped down the cast-iron bath and doors on the way out, taking the towel with him to avoid leaving any DNA. A minute later, he was out at the hotel. He looked up and down the narrow road as he crossed the Enterprise rental van. All was quiet, just the odd Parisian and tourist. Danny got into the van and started it up. He glanced in the back before pulling away, frowning at the sight of a crate with its lid off. The inside was lined with foam. Handcuffs and chains were fixed to its thick wooden sides. With the unnerving thought that someone wanted him kidnapped and crated, Danny pulled into the Paris traffic.